So another thing I want to bring up is unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
And you were on a camping trip with Barrett Brooks, James Clear, Caleb Wojcik, hopefully I'm pronouncing
Logic.
that right, Wojcik, and Matthew Marshall.
Yeah.
So this was such an interesting concept. And I was like, I got to hear Nathan talk a little bit about this.
Yeah. So we realized we'd formed kind of an informal mastermind group. We'd all met at a conference called the World Domination Summit, put on by Chris Gillibo in Portland every year. And we'd formed a little bit of a mastermind group, and we did this first retreat. And it was actually at Barrett's parents. He used to live in Atlanta, and they had a mountain cabin up a ways away. And so we all went there. And one thing that we realized is that we would all we were good at asking for advice. And so we'd be like, hey, I'm struggling to know what to do with this book that I'm writing, this iPhone app or whatever thing. And then everyone would be like, great, let me give you feedback on and answer the question. Like, let me give you advice on this one thing. And then so the person would ask for advice, you'd give it, and then they would listen and receive it and all that. And they're like, but are they going to ask for advice on this other thing? Because it's sort of socially like uncomfortable to be like, hey, Danny, I know you didn't ask for advice, but let me give you advice on all of these things, right? And you'd be like, thanks, bro, but I didn't ask for it. Like, you're just not interested in that. And it's just considered rude. So we said, okay, what if we created an environment where we gave people advice that they didn't ask for on any subject is fair game. And so let's say, in this circle, like, what are the things that you say about someone where you're like, oh man, like they're so good at what they do. Danny's podcast is excellent, but man, if he were to do this one thing differently on the marketing side, it would take off, any of those kinds of things. And it's like, wait, you think these things, you and your friends can talk about them, but you won't tell it to the person. Like, yeah, well, I mean, they didn't ask for advice, And so we just decided that's what we would do. And so the format that we chose is we would set a timer. I think the first one we did was 15 minutes. And so you would have like 6 or 7 of us sitting around in a circle. Let's say I'm on the hot seat. I'd set a timer for 15 minutes. I would get out my laptop, be ready to take notes. And then everyone would start talking about me as if I'm not there. And so it's like, okay, Nathan's gone. We'd make jokes about it of like, oh, well, Nathan's not here anymore. Like, what should we say about him? And so it helps to talk about someone in the third person, I think, in that way. Of like, like taking James Clear, for example, because this is before his, Atomic Habits had sold 4 million copies, and all of this. And so we would say things like, James has great ideas for this book, but you need, whatever the next steps needed to be to put it together, any of that. And it was really helpful to say, James should do this, or I wish James understood this thing, rather than you like doing first or second person. And so what you would find is you end up hearing the best compliments you've ever heard, because it's the stuff that all your friends who really admire and trust and respect you are saying about you behind your back. You just never actually hear it. So it's sort of like, okay, if I don't know, if James Clear were to die, what would we say at his funeral? Like, let's say that so he can actually hear it now. And then it's followed by the best, like, constructive, said from a place of love criticism of like, I don't know, someone's been working on this project forever, and like either make it into a thing and put in effort, or like shut it down and move on, like that kind of advice. And so it ended up being really powerful. And we set that timer. Once the timer goes off, people finish up anything else that they have to say. And then from there, what happens is the person comes back and we're like, oh, Nathan, welcome back, and then you get to go kind of just backwards and work through your notes and say like, oh, Barrett, when you said that made me think of, and like, that's interesting feedback, and kind of reflect it back. Then we just move around the room doing that. And so that's been such a powerful thing. It's a really good point of connection. It's been amazing for our mastermind group, and we've implemented it at ConvertKit, and we've used it for the last 5 years at ConvertKit now, at all our team retreats. And we have each team do it individually. We have cross teams do it. So sometimes we've had like the whole company giving unsolicited feedback to the engineering team, the whole company giving unsolicited feedback to Barrett and I as executives, all of that.
How did your ego feel when you first heard that criticism?
I think pretty good. It's one of those things that you kind of know what people think already. And you kind of know your shortcomings and all of that. And it's just better to have people say it. Like, especially if you're self-critical, or you have an inner voice that's pretty critical, then you might be making up things that you think other people think. And that is so much more of an intellectually and emotionally draining process than like just asking someone, what do you think? And trusting that they're going to give like an honest, straightforward answer. And so even if they say something that's really challenging to hear, like, hey, when you do this work, it's not up to the quality that I know you're capable of. It's said in a way where like someone's not saying like, this is terrible quality, you should be ashamed of it. They're saying like, look, I know you can do better. And there's sort of a compliment in there, as well as there's like criticism, a compliment, and a call to action all in one, where it's saying like, I care about you, I want the best from you, I see what you're capable of, and you're not living up to it. And so, yeah, it usually doesn't hurt too much, but you have to go in with that expectation that like, it's not about ego.